Alright, so we're going to get started with using Blender. Now this video is so that you understand what kind of shortcuts and hotkeys I use so you can follow along with my own video tutorials and little lessons. So we're going to get started. When you first install Blender, you're going to get a little prompt the first time you run it that says what kind of keys you want to use. Use the default keys. You'll get a splash screen, click off to the side of that, and you'll end up at a scene like this. Now hold down the middle mouse button, you can orbit around. Shift middle mouse, you can pan around, mouse wheel in and out, you can zoom in and out. I have a couple different objects here. We have a cube, a light, a camera, and you can see these in the list up here as well. Now, you can hide these and unhide these by hitting the little eye icon. This is going to turn them off and on in render. Okay, so in this case, if I was to press F12, it will render from the camera here. So if I press F12, you'll see it looks like so. No big deal. But if I was to turn off the cube with the little render tab, it won't render the cube now. All right. So that's what that little button does. It's really simple. Now, these objects are in a 3D world, and at the very center of this 3D world is where all these little lines kind of intersect each other. It's called the world origin. Okay, it's represented numerically as 0, 0, 0. But these little grid squares are 1 by 1 meters. So everything in Blender is based on metric meters by default. You can change these things, but I highly recommend just using the default settings there. And just get used to working in meters anyways. Nonetheless, you can select multiple objects by hitting Shift and clicking at the same time. You can do like so. All right. Now, let's select the cube here. If we hit the tilde key, you'll see we can view it from the left, the right, and the bottom, the top, front, back, etc. Tilde is above the tab key, by the way, so the top left of your keyboard. It's a little squiggly line. If we go into right view here, you'll see that we go into right orthographic. We can hit the middle mouse button and orbit out of it. We can do this for the left, the top, the bottom. It all works the same. Now, what you'll see in my videos is a lot of times I'll just be orbiting and then I'll snap into one of those views. So if I orbit and hit Alt at the same time, as I get close to lining up to a certain axis here, you'll see that it snaps into that axis. So you'll see me do this quite a bit, and it happens very fast. So just pay attention, and it shouldn't be too bad. There's a trick to this. There's a caveat. If you come in at an angle at the top, it'll turn it into user orthographic. And when you go to orbit back out, it stays in user orthographic. Go to view and perspective orthographic here. It's number pad 5, by the way, so you can just hit number pad 5 and get out of it. It'll turn it back into user perspective here, which is real nice. All right, so we got these elements. This cube here, we can delete it by pressing X. Delete it, press Shift A, and we'll create another cube real quick. This cube, when we create it, Shift A, create mesh cube. We can change some values here down at the bottom left. Just open this up, and you'll see we change the size of it to maybe 1 meter or 2 meters, right? And by default, it's 2 meters. Now, if we were to create something else, say Shift A, mesh, cylinder, we can change things like the vertice count. So we can change it down to 6. You'll see it becomes more like so. We can change the radius as well and fun stuff like that. All right. Occasionally, you want to create multiple objects. We're going to create a cube. Let's move. Let's learn how to move real quick. You could use these little gizmos, move, rotate, and scale. When you select an object, you'll get the little icon here for it. You grab a handle and you click and hold on it and you can move, or whatever the case may be. Very easy to use as a beginner. However, I highly recommend trying to just keep select box here selected and using hotkeys. So pressing G will let you move, R will rotate. G stands for grab, by the way. So, and then S for scale. Now, you use this in tandem with other hotkeys. So Blender does a lot of like hotkey and then more hotkeys on top of it. So G and then X, you can see I can move on the X-axis. G, Y, G, Z, right? But once you hit G, you don't have to keep hitting G over and over. Let's say you want to move on X, you can move on X, or you can move on Y or Z. So just hit G and then X, Y, or Z. And this works with rotation as well. So you can press R and X, you can start to rotate. S and X, you can start to scale. Let's say you want to move on 2 and not the other one. In this situation, let's say we want to not move up and down. So that would be the Z axis here. We can press G, Shift Z, We can move on X and Y at the same time. This will work with Shift X or Shift Y as well. And this works in scaling as well, so you can do that. When rotating, you can press RX and type in a degree after. So like RX 45, you can rotate 45 degrees, or RX negative 45 if you want to go the other direction. Hard to tell with the cube, but that's what it's doing. So when you're moving, you can press GY, and let's say you want to move 3 meters, you can type in 3. Okay, not a big deal, right? Left click, it confirms. If you were to right click, it just cancels. Now press N, brings out this little side panel. Whenever you're moving an object around, press G and Y, you'll see that this became +3 on the Y axis. If I was to move the other direction, it becomes -4, -3. Basically, this little icon tells you which side's positive and which side's negative. So your Y-axis being the green one, on the right side of the X-axis here, all of this is going to be positive. The other side's going to be negative. That's how that works out. Sometimes you might just want to zero this out. You can just press backspace and it will reset it to its default values, which is 0, 0, 0. And that's basically the world origin point is at 0, 0, 0, right? But your object origin point now matches it. So your object origin point is actually this little orange circle here in the middle, this little orange dot. And you can change that and position it. I'll get into that when we get into edit mode, but so that is where this location is actually at. This is what it's referencing, is that orange dot. Okay. Now, Shift D will let you duplicate, and you can hit an axis. So Shift D and then Y, you can duplicate like so, right? We'll do it out here. We'll make another copy. So Shift D and then Y, just move, click. Right. So we got 3 objects here. We can hold Shift and select multiple objects. You'll notice one is bright orange. If we wanted to select another one, it turns bright orange. But if we click again, it will deselect it. So just keep that in mind. That's how object mode works. Now, the bright orange highlight means it's the active element or the active object. So when I press R and rotate, these all rotate around their combined medium point. So for example, it's going to rotate off center, right? We can change it from median point to individual origins, and we can actually, I'm going to press R and Z, and we can actually rotate them on their individual origin. Okay. We can also rotate them based off the active element. So in this case, this bright orange object, it's going to use its origin point. If I was to select this one as active element, etc., right? You can see how quick and easy it is to switch that around just based on what you have selected. You can also do the 3D cursor. 3D cursor is at the center right now. You'll see that it does that number. Let's say I hold Shift and right click, that 3D cursor will be positioned somewhere else, and now it will rotate off of that. Okay. Same deal. We'll go back to median point here and play around with this a little bit. So I'm going to press R and Y, rotate this cube a little bit. And by default, I'm going to use this to just demonstrate when you move something, you move along the world origin or the global axis, right? So X, Y, Z. Every object has a local axis as well. And right now, with this data in here, this rotational value, we can switch it from global to local, and you'll see that now we can actually move the object on its local coordinates. Okay, so we can actually move it like so. So keep that in mind. That's pretty useful, and you'll use it quite a bit. Occasionally, you'll find yourself, let's say, let's scale this one out like this. Now, normally when you scale something, and you just press S to scale, it does what's called uniform scale. They all line up, they all match together. This is not going to break Blender all that much. It usually works pretty well. However, in most 3D packages, Blender included, when you do a non-uniform scale, you'll see the number doesn't line up with the other ones. This can cause problems with like physics and certain algorithms and other things that happen inside of Blender. So you need to reset this sometimes. You can press Control A and you can do what's called apply. So you can apply scales, rotations, or locations. If you apply the scale, okay, what happens is it's just going to one everything back out, which is fine. Usually you don't have a big problem with this. The trick is when you have something that's rotated, and you are to want to use the local coordinates here, as soon as you apply rotation, it's going to get rid of that rotational value. Your local coordinates will become something that looks more like global now. All right, so keep that in mind. Sometimes you don't want to apply all of those at any one time. And if you were to apply something else, say like the location, which is the origin point here, if we were to press Control A, apply location, it actually moves it all the way back to the scene center. So now when you select this cube, its origin point's way over here. So when you rotate it, it does this number. And everything's zeroed out in at ones, even though we know this object's way over here. Quick, easy fix to change the origin point here is to go to Object, Set Origin, Origin to Geometry. Okay, that's just going to put it right in the center of the geometry there. There's a more advanced way where you can set things by the 3D cursor, and I'll show you that in edit mode. But basically, that's controlling objects in Blender in a nutshell. If I hold Shift and right-click, move the 3D cursor. Take note, when you press Shift A, create mesh, let's say a cube, it's always going to be created wherever the 3D cursor is. Okay, you can press Shift S and do cursor to world origin, and it'll position it back at the center. Alternatively, under View, you have a precise location for the 3D cursor, and you can actually position it wherever you want very precisely using basically the same settings here as item. So, all right, so let's go ahead and jump into this. We're going to put this cursor back, create a cube, go to Edit Preferences, and we're going to go to Key Map, tab for Pie Menu. This is one of the only options I really highly recommend you turning on. And then optionally, you can turn off autosave preferences. Autosave preferences should be on by default. If you turn it off, you'll get this little Save Preferences bar here. So every time you change your preferences, you have to actually click Save Preferences. And I prefer to do that so I don't accidentally geek my settings up. All right. Now, so just for an example, a lot of times I might want to set origin to either geometry or 3D cursor. I can assign to quick favorites. I right click on these, assign to quick favorites. Now I can press Q and you'll see they pop up right there. So quick favorites is really useful, and quick favorites changes depending on what mode you're in as well. So sometimes things won't show up in other modes, but when you're in the mode that you want to be in, they'll pop up. So, all right, with that in mind, tab for pie menu, you hit the tab key now, you get a pie menu. It's that simple, and it makes it a lot easier to work with Blender, in my opinion. It should be on by default, in my honest opinion, but it's not. So you can jump into any object, any different mode now. You can do that up here as well. But you know, if we want to go into edit mode, sculpt mode, vertex paint, you name it, right? It's all right here for us to play with. We're going to go into edit mode. And so in edit mode, we have a couple selection options here. We have vertex, edge, and face. So we can press 1, 2, and 3. And I will go through these very quickly. But something I want to point out, every one of those has a context menu. So vertex context menu, when you right click, that's what pops up. If you were to switch to edges, you'll have edge context menu. And then 3, you switch to face, you have face context menu. All right, this can be a little bit confusing at first if you didn't realize they were changing, but they do change. Now, if you hold Shift and click on all of these, you'll notice that we get all the context menus together, which is pretty nice. But basically, Vertex lets you select vertices, and then Edges lets you select edges, and then Face lets you select faces. When you have them all enabled, you can just select any of them at any time, which is pretty nice, but it can be a little bit confusing as well. So I personally, 1, 2, and 3 is what I use, but you're certainly allowed to do whatever you want. Now, there's other menus as well. So there's vertex, edge, and face menu. All right. Hover over things in Blender. A lot of times you'll find the shortcuts for these, and you'll see these are Control V, E, Control E, and Control F, right? So you'll see me do this a lot. Control F, Control E, Control V, or I'll use the right click menu. And there's no right and wrong answers on how you're going to utilize Blender, but as I'm going through my tutorials, I may forget to mention these kind of things, so I just wanted to point it out. All right. When you're in edit mode, we're going to press A to select everything, or A twice to deselect everything. Real simple. Or you can kind of click off to the side if you're using the box selector. Sometimes that doesn't always work. It might select like a single vertex or something, but usually it doesn't cause too many problems. We're going to switch back to global here. Let's do median. Okay. This object, I'm going to select the whole thing, right click, using vertex right now, subdivide. You can see that every time you do an operation, we get a little option here to change things. You can go ahead and bump up the subdivision count, the number of cuts. We'll make it a little bit more here. And then I can click away and that menu goes away. Sometimes this can be problematic because you'll be like, I wanted to keep changing things and I can't now. Well, you can go to edit, adjust last operation. And you'll see that it has popped back up now. So this is kind of a little hidden piece of Blender that sometimes you'll forget. Add to quick favorites, and then you won't forget it now. Okay. It's also F9, by the way. And if you're using, you turned off autosave preferences, you'll have to save after you make quick favorites or shortcut hotkeys. So keep that in mind. So another one I do like to use, I'm going to go to object mode real quick, is wireframe here. Instead of coming here and checking it every time, I'll right click this box and add assign a shortcut, and I'll use my back button on my mouse. So now I can turn it on and off with just my mouse. All right, and then don't forget to save your preferences if you're going to do that. Now this object in edit mode, we're going to select by vertices here. We can actually tilde key view selected. You can see we can zoom in on any section here. Right, pretty easy. And then well, let's say we want to select multiple elements. So we can hold Control and click. We'll get shortest path selection. Control and Shift does the shortest path selection, but it's more like a little box selection almost. So that's pretty nice. If we go to faces, we hold Alt and left click, we can do a loop selection. A loop like so. Okay, and that's only if they're parallel lines, basically. Like your edges have to be parallel with the same amount of vertices and they have to be quads. That's going to allow you to select loops entirely. In a situation like up here, like you can do this with edges as well. But up here, this isn't a loop. At least it's not a full loop. So it only selects this row of edges. Okay. And that's going to be because right here, it kind of splits up and behaves a little bit differently there. So faces and objects can be hidden with H. So in object mode, if you press H, hides everything. When you're editing in edit mode, you can actually select pieces of your model and you can press H and hide them. So you'll run into this problem where a lot of times you accidentally press H instead of G. That's okay. Just press Alt H, unhide everything, and it should be fine. You'll know if this is occurring because when you go into object mode, looks fine, edit mode, it disappears. So Alt H, that's the quick takeaway there. If you want to hide everything else except what is selected, you can press Shift H. And it'll hide pretty much everything. So this is pretty useful in certain situations. So I'm going to grab this set of row, or this row here, and say I just want to edit this area. I can press Shift H, and I can of course come in here and press G and Z and move things around like so. But I can turn on proportional editor, press G and Z, and you'll see we can now move it like this and use the mouse wheel to adjust this curvature. There's also some curvature settings in here, so different types of fall off. I'll let you play with that to kind of figure it out, but let's say I want to move it up like this. Now I press Alt H. You'll see that the only pieces of this mesh that are affected were the pieces that actually touch this area. Other than that, the rest of the mesh is perfectly fine and we have no problems. If we didn't do this, and let's say we did kind of the same thing, we wanted to move right here, you'll see it does the whole side of that face. So being able to hide your mesh is actually pretty useful. So keep that in mind. Something you're going to want to utilize quite a bit of. All right. All right. So we got something called a cursor selector as well. So press C. You can use a little cursor selector. Just left click and select. Mouse wheel in and out to change the size. Middle mouse button, you can deselect. Right click just gets you out of it. That's a real useful as one. Occasionally, when you're using the select box here, you'll be like, I want to select this side of this object. And it doesn't select the back side of it. Okay, so there's a little mode called toggle X-ray, right? Or press Alt Z as the shortcut. And you can kind of line up where you need to and just click and select. All right, you got to hit the little little black dots in the middle to actually select those faces, okay? And you can press Alt-Z and just turn it off again real quick if you need to. Get in the habit of using that. It's a lot easier than coming up here and clicking it every time. So, and then once again, you could hide this if you need to, or whatever the case may be. Occasionally, you'll have a press Alt and select this edge here, this edge loop. Occasionally, you'll have a loop or something you don't want. You can press X, and you can dissolve edges, vertices, or faces. So, in this case, if we dissolve the edges, you'll see it cleans it up. It doesn't delete the faces, right? So if you were to like delete edges, it'll do this number, not what you want. So dissolving edges works a lot better. You can do this pretty much anywhere at any time, and it'll recalculate things if it needs to. All right. There's another method of dissolving called limited dissolve. Click that, and you'll see that whole section became just one polygon. But it does in fact have vertices all the way around it. So this is a giant, what we call an n-gon. And I'm just going to demonstrate what this is real quick by, I'm going to select this face, press Shift D and then X. I can duplicate it out. And Shift D and X a couple times there real quick. I'm going to select these two top vertices, press M, merge by distance. Oops, sorry, merge by at center. Add a loop cut, so I'm pressing Control R. This is loop cut and slide. So you loop cut and slide. The first thing it's going to do is create a loop. Let me explain this a little better. Control R. You can mouse wheel up and down to create loops. All right, I'm going to do one. You cut it, and now you can slide it around. And you can place it here by left clicking or place it at the center by right clicking. So I'm going to right click, and you'll see it places it there like so. I'm going to turn proportional editing off real quick. And I'm going to dissolve this edge, and you'll see it actually messes it up. So we're going to do a limited dissolve. Okay. These are your main types of faces inside of if I could say it, polygonal modeling. You're going to have three main types of faces. You have what's called an n-gon, which is 5 or more vertices and edges. It could be up to 1,000, but it's always going to be 5 or more. Triangle, which is 3 edges and verts, and a quad, which is 4. Okay, this is pretty important to remember because when you're modeling, it's best to use quads. You can get away with triangles and n-gons, and some people actually prefer working with n-gons, but I'm going to tell you why here real quick. Because when you have an object and you want to create a loop selection, right? When you have an n-gon, it doesn't select through there. Blender actually, I believe, has tried to, they added a new feature that has to do with this, where it sometimes can select through triangles and other weird things, but just don't count on it always working. So just keep that in mind. If I was to press G twice, I can slide this vertex wherever I want. If I turn on auto merge, it's going to auto merge it, but I haven't turned it on yet. I'm going to show you what happens. So right now we have 2 vertices on top of one another. This is called a double vert. We can press A, merge by distance, and it removes that one vertice. So that's pretty useful. Alternatively, we can turn on auto merge, which does the same thing, but automatically for the most part. It doesn't always do it, but a lot of times it'll get it done. And under the options here, you'll see the threshold for it. So auto merge threshold is 0.001. You can bump that up or lower if needed. Keep that in mind. If I press G twice now, slide it down, bump it into the other vertice, it's automatically merged. It's not doubled. All right. But I just wanted to do this to prove a point that this loop ends here on this side, right? But it also ends at this triangle. And so these triangles can become problematic when trying to make loop selections. Generally speaking, you want to have good control of your mesh and your topology, right? And so this would be considered not necessarily bad topology, but it's bad topology flow, or not very preferable topology flow anyways. Whereas, you know, having something, let's move this, so G, Shift, X. If I had something like this going on, you know, this is bad topology. This isn't something you would want. So you would actually have to clean these kind of things up. Make sure you're not over, you know, running things behind the other like that or something. That's bad topology right there. So a couple other cool little things we can do here. Well, we can do what's called extrusions. So if I Control Shift click, press E, I can extrude something like so. Once again, if you press E and you right click, it looks like you just canceled the operation, but you actually just created a bunch of doubles in the corners. So you need to press A, M, merge by distance. Even though auto merge is on, it doesn't do it automatically. So you have to come back and fix that. So press A, M, merge by distance. Keep that in mind. That's a real useful one. Occasionally you'll run into this problem. And so I'm going to delete this face. X, delete face. All right. Now it looks like it's solid in here. Like there's stuff to see, right? It's really not. By default, Blender renders backside faces. So when you turn on back face culling, it's going to actually show you the actual faces now. And so that's a little arrow here, back face culling. And so when you get this model into a game, they don't by default render back faces. And the reason is, or the reason why you want to turn on back face culling is so that you know when this goes over to the game engine, if you're going to make game models anyways, you're going to know which direction they're facing. This also has a role in rendering as well. Sometimes having faces face the wrong direction could cause problems. So you can flip faces by pressing Alt-N, and you'll get a normals panel. There's one that's called flip, right? And so now this one will actually be looking inwards like so. Okay. You can select the whole object, press Alt-N, and do recalculate outside. It'll look like it just kind of did, but you can also do inside if you need to flip an entire object around. So keep that in mind, it's pretty useful. And we're going to select it all real quick, recalculate outside. You see when I recalculate those outside, these ones are wrong, so I got to flip them, right? Sometimes that'll happen. You'll have to manually adjust a couple faces still and reflip them manually. Nonetheless, we can fill in gaps like this with an N-gon by pressing F. There's another cool one. When you press Control F, you can do a grid fill. Grid fill is only going to work if there's even numbers of sides, okay? And it doesn't always come in this pretty. You can play with the span and the offset to get things to look exactly the way you want if it doesn't come in just right. So grid fill is pretty useful. Now, there's another cool tool called Inset. If we press I, it will inset like so. And now take notice up here at the top. A lot of times whenever you're doing an operation, at the top or the bottom here, there'll be a little list of different shortcuts you can use while doing it. So if I press I and I do this, just fine. But if I do an inset again, you'll see that there's all these different little options up here. So there's depth, which is controlled to tweak. So it actually acts like an extrude a little bit, which is nice. But there's also, you can do I for individual, okay, which is real useful. And take note of that, all right? So you can create some patterns like that if you wanted. In the situation you have an empty face here, and let's say we're doing an inset like this, I could press B to turn on boundary, and wherever there's no face data, it will actually stick to that edge there. Otherwise, it'll try to do this, but you can keep it like so. So that might be something you want to do. Occasionally, just blow away a face, and then that way you can have that kind of set up just perfect like that. Press E and extrude. There's also beveling, so select an edge, Control B, you can bevel. You can select a single vertex, press Control B, and then V. You can see the options are way down here for this one. So when I press Control B, all right, you see all those options down there? And I can press V, and we can do just a single vertex bevel, which can be quite useful sometimes as well. We'll create a triangle, so just keep that in mind. There's ways to fix things, of course. A lot of times you're going to find yourself needing to fix things manually. So you're going to use the knife tool. So you can press K, and you'll see you can click anywhere and start creating a cut. All right. Once you create that cut and you're happy with it, you can press E, and that will let you keep cutting. Okay. You can start another cut somewhere, hit E and start another cut somewhere. All right. And then once you're done with all that, you can hit the space bar, and that's it. The cuts are in place. No need to continue. Or if you just need one cut and that's it, you can press spacebar after you're done. No big deal. It's pretty useful. And once again, loop cut and slide, you can do, or sorry, not loop cut, slide, just sliding vertices. You can slide faces as well and edges, but press G twice, auto merges on. You can do a whole row at a time usually, and kind of clean things up there. All right. Okay, so in some situations, when you're working on an object, it can be hard to tell what's going on with your face topology. So let me go ahead and kind of do a little demo here, I guess. We'll make that something similar to that selection there, but we'll do it a little bit deeper. So something like that. So when you look at this like straight on, it's almost kind of hard to tell what's going on, right? Personally, that's why I have the wireframe on my mouse. Okay, but you can also turn on cavity. And screen may not be enough. You might want to use world. It looks more like this. Or you could use both. So you can actually go use both of those. And together, it makes it a lot easier to tell what's going on in your model here. And whatnot. Sometimes your model will be faceted. It looks like this here. You can right click, shade it smooth. If you don't have enough topology or the model's not very good, or it's too low poly anyways, it can look pretty wonky like this. There's a quick little kind of like cheat for this. You go to this little tab here, this little green one, normals, and then auto smooth. And you can bump this number around and change with the parameters and get it set up just right. Okay. And for the most part, this works out pretty well. And if you do ever find yourself in a situation where you need more smoothing to occur, you can always just add in some bevels if needed. All right. So something like that. It may not be perfect for low poly, but normally you can get by with it. Just keep that in mind. All right, so we're going to create a couple objects here real quick. Create a cube, create a cube, create a cube, and doing this in object mode. Now, whenever you want to combine objects together, it's going to use the origin point of the active element. So this bright orange one here, Control J, you'll see that now that's the origin point for the object, right? And go into edit mode here. We got Control J combined it together, but now when we go into edit mode, we can work on all these. That's fine. And it isn't a real big problem until you want to select one object. So click off to the side somewhere, press L, you can select that entire object and move it around. Or you can select multiples by just, if you keep hitting L. All right. By default, seam is marked. If you have UV seams, it's going to stop at those seams. So you can hold Shift and unselect that. That'll make sure it's only selecting the object itself. Shift L to deselect. Okay. So select an object, press P. You can separate that selection. You'll see now we have two objects, but they're all using the world origin point again. Okay, of the same active element from the start, right? And so we can quickly change that, set origin, object set origin to geometry. You have to do this in object mode, by the way. We can do that number just fine. But let's say we're going to combine them together real quick. I'm going to go over one more thing. Go into edit mode. You can select all of it, press P, and separate by loose parts. And then it'll give us 3 separate elements. So that's a good way to explode an object real quick. So basically you can move things around if you need to. But let's say we want to place this origin point on the very bottom down here. It's very easy. You go into edit mode, select that face, Shift S, do a cursor to selected. All right. And now in object mode, you set origin to 3D cursor. Just like that, you're done. Okay, so it goes by pretty quick when you get used to it. You do that number real quick. So one more time, edit mode, Shift S, cursor to selected. Go back to object mode. If you have it on quick favorites, you can do origin to 3D cursor or object set origin 3D cursor, right? So that's how that works out. Not too bad. There's a few other things you can do in edit mode. I'm just going to talk about real quick. Just go over some of my favorites. So we know about loop, cut, and slide. Mouse wheel up and down for that. Know about bevel. You can also mouse wheel up and down for this as well. Pretty useful. But there's one I want to talk about, which is if I was to select this loop here. If I press E and try to extrude that, it goes just straight up. Not going to do much. So what I need to do is press Alt-E and extrude faces along normals, and it will do this number. Sometimes this doesn't come out right. I'll show you what I'm talking about here, but let's say I do it again. You'll see it comes out kind of looking semi-cylindrical or something, right? There's an option here called offset even, and that's going to straighten it out for you. And so that's just something to keep in mind. There's a ton of other little tools that I'm not going to cover in this video. Keep in mind, there's these little things down here that you can use. Some of these are quite useful, and some you may or may not use as much, but under mesh, there's a lot of other little options as well, such as like bisect, convex hull. And under transform, there is a lot of these right here under transform. So there's like push, pull, warp, and all kinds of other fun stuff. And I'll talk about these in little mini videos or during projects as I'm using them. It's a lot easier to learn them as I'm going through them, but you're going to spend a couple years in Blender, and you're going to always constantly be learning like new shortcuts and hotkeys. So personally, I work on usually like static mesh, game objects. That's my favorite types of things to model usually. So I'm working in the layout modeling tab, and these little predefined workspaces are pretty useful. There's also the sculpting tab and UV editing tab. But other than that, I hardly ever go into any of the other ones. Sometimes I'll do shading when setting up a material for render, but for the most part, that's it. I've been using it for about 5 years off and on. Used 3D Studio Max before this, so I got quite a bit of modeling under my belt. And I just, when it comes to game asset design and modeling, there's not a whole lot to it. I mean, when you're doing animations, of course, you'll get into the animation tab a little bit probably, and whatnot. But it's a pretty good little program for being open source, and it's pretty awesome to be honest. So with that in mind, there are a couple add-ons I turn on by default. So the F2 add-on I will enable. I'm not going to be able to probably show you all of these, but loop tools, got caps lock on. Loop tools is very useful. Bool tools is also very useful. There's additional, there's Node Wrangler. I don't know why that popped up with 2 A's, but it did. There's Sapling tree generator, which is nice if you're going to make some trees. Bolt factory is cool. Let's see. There's A.N.T landscape editor. I forgot what it stands for. It's like automatic node terrain or something. I don't know. But let's go. There's so many add-ons I use, it's ridiculous. And then there's a lot of paid and free add-ons I use as well. So I'm not going to go over the paid and free ones in this video necessarily. I'll do little mini reviews and tutorials on them. But whenever I'm in a project, I'll explain which add-ons I'm using and when. So that's not a big deal. But other than that, it's pretty much it for preferences here. When you save a Blender file, a lot of times you'll see a file saved with it called .blend1, and that's going to be your save versions. It's like basically a backup file. So if you don't want a .blend1 file, you can turn that off. Turn it to 0, save your preferences. If you want more, you'll end up with a .blend1, .blend2, .blend3. So just keep that in mind. You can always bump it up as well if you need to. My Blender user interface, I'm using a different theme by default. I've modified minimal dark, okay, to be my own liking. Instead of being so small and green, I've changed it to be a little bit larger and blue. That's pretty much the same theme though. So that's, if you're ever wondering about that, that's what it is. And you can change these themes rather easily just by coming in here and you see the colors here, right? All these different little options everywhere. So like pie menus, box, and just modifying these as needed. And you can always like grab a color here and put it somewhere else by hitting Control C and Control V, and that'll copy and paste it. You can't Control Z back though and undo it. So take your time with it. Be very meticulous on what you're doing if you're going to make your own themes. But generally speaking, this is how I have mine set up. If you were to do a new scene, for example, you do a brand new scene and you go in there and you delete stuff and you change the layout. So like maybe, you know, this is normally like this and you bump it out like so, something like that, right? And then you go File, Default, Save Startup File. It's going to replace your new general. Okay, that's all it's going to do. And so for mine, I've already done that. And I have just a basic human shape that's scaled correctly for games. And basically, that's going to allow me to, when I start working on an object, let's say I create a cylinder here, go into edit mode right away, and hold Control, you can snap incrementally. And then you can also absolute grid snap, which will snap to the grid itself here. But we're going to use incrementally for now. And you can also hold Control and Shift at the same time and do slider adjustments. Okay. If you were moving without holding Control, just moving. If you hold Shift, it's going to move smaller amounts. All right. I create a plane, bring it out. At any time, you can press Shift tilde key. You can use WASD to fly around, E and Q to raise and lower. You can space bar hop over to a section, which is nice. You can, while moving, hold Shift, move faster or slower, right? And then mouse wheel in and out will increase or decrease your speed as well. So this is a very useful way of getting around if you're working in really tight corridors and stuff and you need to have very precise views, or you'll have a bunch of clipping issues or something. Say like there was a say there's like a wall here or something. It's real close, and I need to get right between these two. There's a couple different ways you can approach situations like this. You can press H to hide it, which wouldn't be a bad deal. But in some rare situation you want to actually get between them like this, you can actually do that now with relative ease, and then just left click to confirm your movement, right? Another fun thing to do here is as you're flying, if you hit the G key, it turns on gravity. And so now you're able to use WASD and walk around like it's a first person kind of camera view. And you'll see that you're roughly about the right size as a game character. So Blender put some little pre-thought into this and makes it pretty useful. Maybe this is like some house or something you're modeling, and this is like a jacuzzi or something. I don't know. You can see, you can kind of fill out your scenes and your environments real quick by doing this, right? There's a lot more that goes into modeling. There's a lot more that goes into composition, playing with cameras, etc. But I just wanted to get you up to a point where you understand like how I'm working and how I'm viewing my objects and stuff so quick and getting them laid out and set up. Hopefully, with all that in mind, you now know how to create some objects, delete them, hide them, and all that other good stuff that goes along with it. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will check you out in the next one. Thanks for watching. All right.